Hello, I'm here to chat about how I go about playtesting. But first, I have an important question. Have you ever considered the idea that one of your friends might be a robot? I mean, how would you really know? Really? Take a look at this list. Maybe we can all agree on a password, one that only us humans would know. In that case, let's make it Hunger Games. We will not show this to the robot. Now let's go around the room and ask each player to give us one clue that will convince us that they do in fact know the password. But of course, don't make the clue too obvious or it will help the robot learn the password, right? So now let's look at everyone's clues. Death, female lead, dangerous, J-Law, Jennifer Lawrence, teenagers. Can you tell which one of these players is the robot? If you guessed player 3, congratulations. You spotted the robot and you just won a round of our game Assimilate, which is now available on Steam, by the way. Except we did trick you a little bit. This is actually not our game Assimilate. This is a playtesting prototype of our game, and it's running entirely in Google Sheets. And I'm going to show you why we chose Google Sheets for our prototypes, what steps we took to make them, and why we've continued to prototype 2 more games with spreadsheets as well. So, hello, my name is Chris from Friendship is Fun Studios, and I'm thrilled to be here today to tell you about why I use Google Sheets, a free spreadsheet tool to prototype our party games. A little backstory though. Our studio consists of 3 friends who, as you might have guessed, all love gaming. We decided to make our first game, Assimilate, a social deduction party game during COVID quarantine in 2020. There's myself, designer, Marcus, our developer, and Brett, our artist. None of us had any experience making games before, so truthfully, we really did not know where to start. And here's the problem. We knew we wanted to make fun party games, but in order to know if a party game was actually fun, we knew we'd have to test it a lot. With people, during a pandemic, and I'm sure you can see where the problem is. Not meeting in person meant, paper prototyping was off the table, so we knew we'd have to have a digital solution. But building the game just to playtest it defeated the purpose of playtesting, so what were we to do? I'm not a programmer myself, but I do have a lot of experience with spreadsheets, so I figured why not give it a shot and try to make the game in a spreadsheet. And immediately there were some clear benefits. There were no programming required, obviously. It was just quick to spin up, and we could implement and iterate on the basic game structures very, very quickly. Google Sheets has autosave and version history, which helped us keep track of the changes we made along the way. And spreadsheets can actually handle core game mechanics surprisingly well. For example, we were able to use if-then statements to handle a lot of the voting and scoring mechanisms. We could use different tabs and protected ranges to show the different pieces of information we wanted players to see. And we used data validation to organize and direct their responses accordingly. And last but not least, I don't know if you know this, but Google Sheets is multiplayer compatible right out of the box. So take that, Unreal Engine. But with that being said, and this is precisely why we decided to prototype our first game in G Sheets. And spoiler alert, it worked great for prototyping, and we learned that the game was a lot of fun. Since Assimilate is a party game where players all view one shared screen but each submit clues on their own respective devices, our game had 2 basic parts. We have the game board. This is the shared screen that everyone will see, usually presented on a TV in a living room if played together, or screen shared if played online. And then the players' controllers, usually their phones or mobile devices, where players interact with the game and nobody else is supposed to or should be seeing what they see. So that begs the question, how does one test multiple screens like that in Google Sheets? Well, it's a bit easier than you might think. I, acting as the game host, would share my screen on Google Meet and show the game board tab that you're seeing on the left, while every player had their own individual tabs in the workbook where they'd enter their information to progress the game. That's the tab on the right. All player inputs would then show up from their respective tabs onto the game board, and just like that, we have a working prototype. And this is what we call the admin screen. This is basically houses all the back-end logic for the game. Here's where I'm able to control different parts of the game, like how many players we can accommodate, how many rounds we go on, how many clues each player should enter. This rapid prototyping and playtesting system allowed us to find solid answers for all these questions we had from the get-go. And during the playtesting phase, we realized that there was something missing. Players could technically just cheat the system by submitting a clue that was so specific, it would obviously convince everyone that they are in fact a human, but it'd take all the fun out of the process. I mean, obviously if the password were Hunger Games and they said Mockingbird, right? Then the robot has no chance. So it makes it pretty tricky. So that's when we came up with the idea of a programmer. Someone who's on the robot's team who's actively trying to help the robot pass for human. This really improved our game because not only did it give the robot a fighting chance by giving them a team member who can help share knowledge, but it also forced the human players to submit clues that were not too specific or they might be mistaken for said programmer. This was truly a two birds, one stone situation that helped the game come together, and we came to this big realization while playtesting in Google Sheets without a single line of code ever being written. Now again, we've never made games before, so we had no idea what to think, right? Once we had our alpha, we figured we'd start playtesting and wireframing the actual game based off the feedback we get, and we figured we'd have to iterate the alpha a few more times before we could even get to a beta, which included the final artwork before we launched the game. So we had this long-winded assumption. However, we ended up iterating so quickly with G Sheets that we were able to significantly cut down on our whole timeline. This allowed us to knock out some early game decisions, such as how many players should we accommodate, how should voting work, which lists were fun, which were confusing. Learning all this so quickly helped us cut our production time in half and hone in on the game we wanted it to be. We didn't have to create multiple versions of our alpha game, and we were able to ultimately launch it so much sooner. And that's where we are today. Assimilate launched in Steam in late 2021, and we're currently hard at work on our second game. Except, this process went so quickly that again, while our developers working on game number 2, Alienate, a social deduction trivia game with a fun alien theme, we've already started prototyping game number 3, a cute drawing game where players get to design and pitch their own monstrous abominations. Now that's not to say that Google Sheets does not have their limitations. For example, G Sheets drawbacks do include limited visuals, as you might have guessed. Occasionally slow on mobile. G Sheets does have a pretty effective, easy to use app, but the browser-based version can sometimes prove cumbersome for players who are trying to play on their phone. And then timers. Google Sheets does not have a super user-friendly way of adding a timer to the spreadsheet, and so we'd have to do that part manually. But all in all, while there are some limitations, we found that they're all relatively easy to overcome, and the benefits definitely outweighed the cost. If there's one thing I want you to take away from this presentation, it's that spreadsheets can do a lot more than you think, and you should seriously consider it as a potential prototyping tool. And if you look online, you'll find all sorts of cool examples of people recreating classic games in Excel or Google Sheets. Here, for example, you can see some of my favorites like Wordle, Scrabble, Minesweeper, and even Mario. Yes, someone actually recreated Mario in an Excel spreadsheet. With that being said, some of these were definitely fun projects that probably took as long, if not longer, than actually programming the game. So I wouldn't claim every game should be made in a spreadsheet. But what type of games work best to prototype in spreadsheets, you might ask? Well, to put it simply, simple games. Games with limited inputs and/or minimal logic can and do work really well in a spreadsheet. Now, if you are creating a prototype in a Google spreadsheet, here are a couple formulas that I found very effective. Index match or XLOOKUP are the same idea, that you're ultimately pulling information from one part of a workbook to another. This is without question the most commonly used formula that I use in my spreadsheets, my prototypes. If statements comprises 90% of the logic for most of our games, so you're definitely going to need some if statements in there. Indirect formulas will allow you to pull information from different tabs, even if they have different tab names. This becomes helpful when you have player 1, player 2, so on and so forth. You're not having to recreate everything all the time. And then if error kind of helps you identify when things break and keep things clean when they do. As far as cool features that spreadsheets have, or Google Sheets in general, you can use different tabs for each different screen. This is helpful for making sure that players can only see what they're supposed to see, and everybody can see what you want them to see. And then I would say use images. Honestly, Google Sheets handles images really well, so adding an image in a cell or over a cell is a really effective way of making your spreadsheet look more than just a spreadsheet and elevate it to even looking, or sometimes convincingly, look like a game. Conditional formatting is an effective, easy way to highlight or hide pieces of information that you want people to see. Data validation will help force players to select from a desired list of options, like a drop-down list, or using checkboxes to force them to pick what you want. And then protected ranges. Prevent players from accidentally deleting or altering sections of your workbook will be really important. This is a screenshot from our newest party game we're working on, which is comprised of almost all images. And pro tip, one of the easiest ways to immediately make your spreadsheet look like less of a spreadsheet is just to turn off grid lines. And doing so will make it look so much cleaner. In conclusion, I heard a quote I liked a lot from Reid Hoffman, the co-founder, CEO of LinkedIn. If you're not embarrassed by your first version, you waited too long to show it to people. Now, this doesn't mean intentionally deliver a bad product that will have a subpar player experience, obviously, but it does mean don't be ashamed to test a minimum viable product for your game concept. And sometimes that means don't be afraid to turn a spreadsheet into a game. So that's it. Thank you. If you're interested in our games, please follow our socials at WePlayOnTV. Likewise, if you'd like to see a copy of our newest Google Sheet prototype and kind of poke around in how it works, go to friendshipisfun.com/prototype. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.